Hello. Look at that. It's amazing. I don't think we had that many people here since the first introductory lecture. Has anyone floated before? Has anyone been in a float tank before? You have. 1 hour? 2 hours?
I've done, I think, 5 different 1 hour floats.
5. All right. Well, I think it's going to be more after this talk. I'm pretty sure. And Hawley's here today. I'm really excited about this. Ever since we joined the society, I really wanted to have a talk on floating, and here it is. Ed works for, actually runs Floatworks together with, what's your mate's name?
Chris.
Chris,
my business partner, yeah.
So they're up in London and they have a float centre there, and are busy letting people lie in the dark and reflect on themselves and life. Before we start, there's a flyer in front of you. That is our friend Ollie. I don't know if you've been here for the talk. Are you having a laugh? So he runs a CBD shop now, and if you type in the voucher code for the Psychedelic Society, you get actually money off, and you get CBD for less money. Hi. So yeah, give it up for Ed.
So hi everyone, thanks for having me down here. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the pint as well. It's nice to do a talk on a pint. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, so that you've got the context, and then I'm going to step through and tell you what floating is. So we've got one person who's floated before, right? No one else has ever floated, and Joe, of course. Has anybody got absolutely no idea what floating is whatsoever? Okay, good. So I'll explain what it is, and I'll explain, it's quite a wild story, there's some interesting people involved. So I'll explain the people that have been responsible for the evolution of floating and getting it to where it is today. And then I'll tell you about the research, because that's what's really, really exciting. There's a lot of advanced research being done now that explains exactly what it's doing to our brains, which is really interesting. And then I'll tell you about Floatworks and what our customers say and why we do it and why we think this is really important. And it's aligned with you guys, right? Because there's all sorts of movements going on which relate to elevation of consciousness and freedom and breaking rules, and that is what this story is all about, and that's why we do it. So, yeah, a little bit about me. So, I'm 31 now, and when I was 21, I was extremely stupid, and yeah, just very stupid, very naive, quite immature, and I spent a long time thinking that the most important thing in the world was partying really hard and making loads of money. Which it just isn't, which I realise now. But I spent a very long time doing that. And my business partner also, similarly, he was in a similar world. We both worked in the city of London. We made money and partied, and we thought we were so fucking cool. And I probably peaked in terms of stupidity at about the age of 25, and found myself in hospital with burnout. So the doctor sort of said to me, Ed, if you continue to live like this, you're only going one way, you're going to be back here very soon. So having learned my lesson, I was back when I was 27, in exactly the same position, just completely caned and burnt out again. And that's the point at which I was kind of like, I need to change something. And it wasn't just, hey, hi guys. How you doing? It wasn't just the fact that I was burning out and, you know, it's not good for your health and that kind of thing. It was also there's many ways to get fulfillment, right? We're all looking for something, whether that's whether that's like, it might be a movement like the Psychedelic Society, it might be your job, it might be your intellectual pursuits. But I was obviously trying to find it in all the wrong places by just basically partying my arse off and making cash, like I was saying before. So I was looking for something more fulfillment and that kind of thing. My business partner, meanwhile, doing exactly the same thing, probably a bit more sensitive than me, had just depression basically. He was really depressed, his back was killing him, he was just in a bad place, and his physiotherapist said to him, just go and have a float and it'll help your back. So he went and did it, and he was just like, Ed, you've got to go and have a go at this, it's mental. So I went and had a go, and I honestly found it quite confronting. Like you're in there on your own. There is nothing to distract you from. Well, I mean, we all, surf the internet, drink, take our minds off whatever's going on actually in our subconscious. And when you're in a float tank, you just can't do that. So I thought it was amazing, and he thought it was amazing, and we were like, right, let's just jack our jobs in. We've kind of grown out of this sort of hedonistic lifestyle that we're living, and let's start a float centre. So I won't go into all of the depths of the detail around the business side and how we set it up, because that's not really what I'm here to do. I'm more really to tell you the story of floating and what it is and why we should all be doing it. So this is the modern day float tank. So the guy who created this float tank, when we went to start this business, we went to buy the float tanks from him. So he's now one of the main shareholders in our business as well. This is called the Isopod, and it's the best float tank in the world. I'm going to show you some of the old ones in a minute, and they're just terrifying. It's not a nice picture. So, but this is cool. It's really big. It's got a really good cleaning system. It looks beautiful. It's got an inviting light. So it kind of helps when you're trying to get something as weird as a float system into the mainstream, because people want to get into that. It looks like something you might want to jump into. So the way it works, there's 10 inches of water. There's half a ton of Epsom salt, and then you pull this lid down, and this little black thing here is the light switch, and whenever you're ready, you turn that off. So with half a ton of Epsom salt, you float effortlessly. It's like you're on a bed, but with no fabric, like a water bed, but with no fabric. And the water inside the tank is heated to the same temperature as your skin, and the air, because it's in a closed environment, is also the same temperature as your skin. So you can't feel anything, you can't see anything. The music plays for 10 minutes and that dies, so you can't hear anything. And you've got no sense of gravity whatsoever because you're floating, right? So all you're left with is your breath, your heartbeat, and your mind chattering away at you, just talking shit, stuff that you don't want to hear. And the first time you do it, that's what I say when I say it's quite confronting. The first time you do that, we've had people who've had flashbacks to their childhood, people who've been a bit freaked out the first month, and we've had people who go in and they just switch off and they're in a state of bliss almost immediately. It's not what happened to me. It does happen to me now though when I do it, because you get better at it like anything. So that's what floating is in a nutshell, but I'll go through and we'll talk in a bit more depth about what it is. So this is where it gets quite interesting. Has anyone ever heard of John C. Lilly? So he's he's a psychedelic dude. He's like, he's one of the big guns really in the world of psychedelics. He's experimented a lot, but in the early 1950s, he created a way to insert electrodes into the brains of monkeys without hurting them. Sounds suspicious to me. I think they probably weren't thrilled about it, but he found a way to do it that he thought wouldn't hurt them anyway. And then he analysed how their brains were reacting to certain stimuli. So you could give it a banana and it's happy, and a certain part of its brain fires up and that kind of thing. So he was a real pioneer in that respect. And what he was trying to do was understand how consciousness works from the outside. So when we give something to a monkey, how does that impact its consciousness? And then in 1954, he created a float tank. So this is the first one. So it's like lying face down in a dirty tub with a gas mask on. It's terrifying, really, when you compare it to what it's become today. And what you're trying to do here is, as I said to you before, remove all of the senses, and then if there's no sensory inputs coming in, then the idea is that you can pinpoint the origin of consciousness, right? Because there's nothing coming in from the outside. So where is consciousness on the inside? And that's what he was trying to do. So he started out with this tank, and then he got distracted by dolphins. I don't know if does anyone know anything about John C. Lilly and dolphins? It's quite weird. So NASA wanted to figure out if we ever get invaded by aliens, this is true, how do we communicate with them? So they asked him to help and to take a look at dolphins, because he wanted to talk to dolphins anyway. That was on his list. So the idea being, if we can talk to a dolphin's got 40%, I think their brain is 40% larger than a human brain. So the idea was, these are intelligent beings, as much as we can find. Can we talk to them? Because if we can, obviously we'll be able to talk to aliens. That was the idea. Anyway. So what he did is he flooded a house in California with salt water and put dolphins in it. This is true, you can Google this. And Google doesn't lie. And then his researchers lived in the house with the dolphins and they tried to talk to them. And then they couldn't talk to them. So, but it ended in controversy, really, because, well, A, it didn't work. Although they did make some different discoveries and they did contribute to marine laws in America, which is cool, because his whole thing was, these are ancient, and I quite like this, and I think there's some truth to this. These are ancient sentient beings that are intelligent, and rather than hunting whales and dolphins, we should be chatting to them, which is cool. But one of the researchers was accused of having sexual relations with the dolphins, which she later admitted that she was. But she said the reason why is because they wouldn't concentrate. So she had sexual relations with them to calm them down so they could concentrate on the tasks that were involved. This is her story. That's how. This is all true, by the way, guys. So that's how the experiment ended. But the important thing. This is all true. But the important thing to remember is that he's a weird guy, for sure, but he's also absolutely an innovator and he's always thinking of new ways to do things and approach things, even if that is wanking off dolphins. Okay? So, after that period of time, he became very heavily into psychedelics. And that's when he started to experiment heavily with intravenous ketamine and LSD and that kind of thing. And he took it quite far, as you would imagine, just based on who he is and what he's like. And he started to experiment really heavily in the tank as well with that kind of stuff. And to break down all kinds of barriers of normal consciousness and what we would consider to be normal. And you know, at this point, he's done some amazing research, and he was a credible scientist, and he had a background in physics and biology. But obviously, towards the end, he became more of a mythical guy, and lost a bit of his credibility in normal science. And it kind of peaked when he started to talk about, in the 70s, he started to talk about a intergalactic tribunal that was running life on Earth that we didn't fully understand, and that there was a way to tap into that. He really started to get out there towards the end, and then lost a lot of credibility. But he did leave us with the beginnings of the float tank, and he's the father of it. And right up until the end, even when he died in 2001, the people that worked with him said he was slightly insane, but he was also a genius as well in many ways. And he is, as we see when we walk through this talk, the idea of removing all of your sensory inputs. It's a brilliant idea when you think about it, because it just leaves you with whatever it is at the core of your consciousness, just to remove all of that noise. And we've found out now through more advanced research that actually it's amazing, and the things that it's doing for human beings are incredible, and we should be using them. So this is another weird guy. He's part of the story, and he's written the most famous book on floating. Basically, it's called Exploring the Private Sea. And he was an amazing seeker who was always looking for the origin of the root of consciousness. So in New York in the 60s, he was another guy who was really into psychedelics, and he experimented with mescaline and psilocybin, and he found through those experiences that he could get a state of oneness and a state of being that perhaps you can't get anywhere else, or so he thought at the time. But the problem that he found with that is, and I can empathise with him, is that if you go too far with that kind of stuff, on any given occasion, coming back down the mountain, as he put it, can be quite stressful. So he started to look for other ways to achieve that same sense of oneness and being. And he actually moved on in the 70s just to live in total isolation. So he lived in a log cabin in the mountains and just cut himself off from people. And in doing so, he said that he found an incredible sense of presence, because there was no past, really. He'd forgotten about that, he'd gone off on his own. There was no future, because he didn't really intend to go anywhere at any point, and he was just totally in the present moment, which I personally believe is kind of a key to being happy, and he sort of found that in living in isolation on his own. Having said that, he got bored of being on his own, he came back to New York, and that was in the 80s, and that's when somebody said to him, because he's a great writer and he's kind of a consciousness explorer, will you write an article for us on floating? So he went and he had a float to prepare for his article, and he said it was like going home. So he's done a lot of experimentation with his consciousness, and he found that floating was a way to get back to that sense of just being that he'd experienced in isolation and that he'd experienced through psychedelics. But he was very poor, so he wanted to find a way to float pretty much all the time, because he's obviously an extreme dude. He's gone and lived on his own, he's tried everything, so now he just wants to float non-stop. He's got no money. So he said, right, I'm going to write a book on floating, and then everyone's going to give me free floats. And it worked. So he wrote a book on floating, and then he would just go around saying, I'm writing this book, I need to float, can I float? I'll talk about it in the book. And everyone's like, as you would be, I would if you came to my float centre. I was like, sure, get in. So he just floated for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and wrote about those experiences, and he's got loads of hypotheses in his book, which I won't go into, as to what floating is doing, and not all of them are scientific, right? A lot of them are just his weird and wonderful ideas as to what it might be. So that's actually not the end of his story there. So he wrote this book, and it gets kind of more interesting and quite traumatic. So he was then caught in a terrible house fire, lost all of his work, and effectively thought he was dead because he just passed out through smoke inhalation, and he thought he was gone. He said he can remember slipping away. Firemen managed to get him out and get him to a hospital, and he woke up with a tube in his throat, breathing for him, and he came back to life. And then he sounds to me, he seems to be quite accident prone. So after that, he was on the recovery to go for a jog after he'd been through this traumatic event, and he wanted to kind of get himself back on the road to recovery. He went for a jog, and he slipped on some ice and fell off a bridge into a riverbed full of rocks. I don't know why we're all laughing, but we are. And snapped his spine. And then he's just lying he says he can remember lying on a rock, broke his spine, with water kind of lapping over him. And in typical Michael Hutchison style, he was like, it was just bliss, I was just drinking. He's a right dreamer. And fortunately, again, someone found him in the riverbed and rescued him. I mean, I bet he might have been not wanting to be rescued by the sounds of it, like he was loving it. But he got rescued, and he woke up again in a hospital, and on a bed or whatever, and it saved him again. But he was paralysed this time. So he ended up for 4 months or so in this hospital wing with a load of Alzheimer's patients. And he said initially it was like hell, because he couldn't move. They were all shouting at him, they tied his clothes to take his stuff, and it was just chaos. But he then got to back to a state that he'd been in when he was on psychedelics or in the float tank or in isolation, and he got to a state of kind of meditation and being. And he said and that's the quote that he wrote about it, he said being in the nursing home was just a state of constant bliss by the end, because he'd just gone inward again. So there's like a recurring theme of going inward. I mean, this guy's obviously extreme, but he's been able to deal with some pretty crazy shit by just going inward and focusing on just being in the present moment. So yeah, he's another key guy in the story of floating. So, is anyone who's heard of Joe Rogan? I assume he's quite big time. Yeah, quite a few people. So he has been amazing for me and my business, because we've actually got a referral option now. So people come to Floatworks when they say referred by, and we had to add Joe Rogan because so many people were writing Joe Rogan in the field. Because this guy's I think he's got 15 million downloads a month on his podcast, and he talks a lot about floating. He loves it. So he talks all sorts of stuff. He talks a lot about DMT and the stuff that's done for him. But the reason why he floats is because he believes that challenging yourself mentally and physically is the way to grow, basically. And he takes it up a few levels actually in the float tank, because he will consume pretty significant amounts of psilocybin mushrooms and edibles and then get in the float tank, which is really intense stuff. And he talks about it like being like the world is ending and it's seriously traumatic, but that he comes out the other side and feels a lot better. The other really interesting thing about him is that he's not I think he's quite agnostic in terms of consciousness. He's not particularly spiritual, he's not particularly scientific, he's just, I don't know, is what he says. And I'd agree with him, I don't think anyone knows. But he talks about René Descartes, and he talks about there's like a bit of a standoffishness with modern science to talk about mystical experiences. And we don't know what mystical experiences are, right? It doesn't need to be religious. It doesn't need to be you think you know the meaning of the universe. But he talks about them as being very, very important for growth and understanding and creativity and all these things. And he uses René Descartes as an example because he was pivotal for creating a lot of the knowledge that we have today in the world of science. And he claimed that a lot of his revelations came through angels visiting him in his sleep and telling him formulas and stuff, which is difficult to believe. But at the same time, the point that Joe Rogan's making is like these experiences, and we all know, I'm sure you've all had crazy experiences, they can help you to make leaps and bounds in terms of your understanding and the way that you feel about the world that you live in and how you understand everything. So that's why he's a proponent of floating, and honestly that's a major reason why I started doing it, and a major reason why I continue to do it, because it's a state of consciousness that can really open up your mind and also your understanding of yourself. So they're kind of three really big people in the story, in the journey. But what's really interesting is that's all story stuff, and it's all fun, and there's like loads of cool, quirky anecdotes around those guys. But the thing that's amazing is that there's strong research now for floating and what it's doing. So this is just a little snapshot of some things that have been demonstrated. So for pain, it's been shown to reduce pain really significantly in arthritis and fibromyalgia, which is where all your muscles contract. And also it's been shown to reduce blood pressure and hypertension, to lower cortisol levels. They've done studies with people solving puzzles and improvising jazz music and thinking of research topics, and it's shown that people are much more creative. They've done studies on, not babies, can't put a baby in a float tank, but it's just a cute picture. And maybe you can put a baby in a float tank. But I won't try. But yeah, on sleeping, so there's people floating for a period of time, and it's been demonstrated that if they float for a month solidly, then 4 months later they're still sleeping really, really well. And then the big thing, the really big thing, which I'm going to talk about in more detail because it's more interesting, is the impact it's having on the brain and the relationship between the brain and anxiety. Because you may not suffer from anxiety, but we all have an element of stress or an element of anxiety. So this guy is another legend. He's just we're very grateful to him again because he's making it legitimate. All the things that we talk about with floating, you can do it, it's amazing. He's giving us like a legitimate story to tell around what it's doing. So what he did is he got 40 people and he randomly assigned them to either a room with a chair in the dark. They put you in a spine neutral position, so you're just lying in the dark, chilling basically for an hour. And then put the other guys into a float pool condition. So he was randomly analysing the difference in reaction between the two groups. And he put them in an fMRI scanner and scanned their brains beforehand. And he gave them an anxiety test beforehand. He did this over the course of 3 floats. So pre-float, he knew what their brain was doing, and he knew how anxious they were. During the float, nobody knows what's going on, because we've not measured it. But he's trying to get an experiment set up where we have waterproof EEG monitors and stuff, but we're not there yet. So during the float, no one knows. And I mean, the only thing we do know actually is that because we know that the temperature is consistent, there's no sound, there's no sight, we know that all of these sensory cortices are effectively shut down. So we know that much. And then post-float, he did the analysis again. So the first thing, which is quite simple, it's still really nice and cool, is that anxiety was much lower, which is great. But what's really fascinating is the brain stuff. So, taking a step back for a moment, there's a load of other research that's been done around this network in the brain, called the Salience Network. And it's these two areas, the right anterior insular and the dorsal anterior cingulate. And these two brain areas, the activity in them correlates in a number of situations. So there was 200 studies, a meta-analysis was done, 3,000 participants, and it showed that these areas of the brain fire up at the same time whenever we experience really negative emotions, whenever we're really confused, and whenever we feel physical pain as well. And then a separate meta-analysis was done on the same network, looking at the areas of the brain that fire up across various mental illnesses. And in schizophrenia, in depression, and in generalized anxiety disorder, this network just fires up like crazy again. So when they took these guys out of the float tanks and did the fMRI scan on them, they found that this area was just doing nothing, like it had just dampened right down. And the reason that they postulate is that there's absolutely no sensory inputs coming in, so your body, we've evolved, if I clap my hands really loud, your Salience Network will fire at your sensory cortices to take a look at me and to listen to what's going on. And that's an anxiety response, right? That's like a fight or flight response. But there is nothing to process when you're in a float tank, so it dampens those things down. And they've been using it in America to treat PTSD for people coming back from war zones and stuff like that, because it just calms them down. And the other thing that's really interesting is that that is called target engagement in pharmaceuticals, which means that we can use floating to target a part of the brain specifically related to a certain undesirable thing like anxiety. And he hasn't done the research yet, but this absolute hero, Justin, is doing more research now, and he hasn't released it, but he says that he's proved that if you float really, really regularly, you can have much better effects on anxiety and depression than if you're taking drugs, which is obviously massive in America because there's a lot more drugs being prescribed, but it's also big. It's big in the UK as well. So that's cool. That's really cool, and it's quite exciting, and it's relevant for anyone. Like, you know, I don't have anxiety disorder, but definitely feel completely chilled out after I've had a float and feel amazing, which is great. Why not? Why wouldn't we all want to feel like that all the time? And why wouldn't, if you've got anxiety, let's bring you down to here and then bring me down even lower. Thank you. Like I'll be lying on the sofa all day. And it also gives you a sense of absolute clarity and clear-headedness as well, because the chatter that might make someone anxious might make me really inefficient and not able to concentrate. So there's all sorts of things at play as a result of this stuff, and we'll learn more and more about it as Justin keeps just being amazing. So this is, like, I thought this was really interesting. This is another thing that he pulled out when he presented his findings. This is crazy. So in 11 studies, we found that participants did not enjoy spending 6 to 15 minutes in a room by themselves with nothing to do. Many preferred to administer electric shocks to themselves instead of being left alone with their thoughts. So and then, which is nuts. And then Microsoft did a study, and they said the human attention span has fallen from 12 seconds to 8 seconds since the year 2000. And a goldfish has the attention span of 9 seconds. So we're just tracking just below goldfish at this point. And then this is this advertising agency as well. So these guys probably don't have good motivation for finding this stuff out. But this advertising agency found out that if you've got a lot of your devices with you, you're generally going to shift your attention between all your devices like 21 times every hour. So like the cultural zeitgeist of the modern day and where we are is that we just can't concentrate, and we can't be on our own for very long, and we have like a bit of a fear, all of us, but a lot of us have a bit of a fear of being left alone, and we'd rather electrocute ourselves. So, but that's not actually the reality, because so he took these people who've been in the pool and in a chair, and I'm sure when they were going in, if you tell someone you're going to sit in a room in the dark for an hour in a chair without your phone, people are like, it's going to be really dull. But generally, people came out and found it to be really pleasant or extremely pleasant afterwards. And you know, it's like I've got friends who go on Vipassana meditations, and like when they're doing it, it's torturous. But when they come out, they feel a million times better than when they went in. So this is another thing that floating is addressing. Really, it's this obsession with being connected the whole time to all of your technology, and to like flicking between different windows, and like the multitasking that we do, and all that kind of stuff, which is definitely decreasing our memory, and who knows what else it's doing to us. So yeah, so Floatworks customers, that's all of the research, but just from my perspective, like we've had all sorts of people coming through our doors. We had Susie Rogers, who's a Paralympian gold medalist, and she came in and she started to float before she went to the Rio Olympics, and she said it just gave her absolute clarity. She was completely calm, and she was walking to the podium to dive off. She said it's the calmest that she's ever been. We had a guy come in, float with us regularly, a member, who just one day we had like a chill out room afterwards where you have a cup of tea and you just chill out because no one really wants to leave straight away. And he was just like, I'm going to quit my job. Cool. I know that feeling. And like we had like an investment banker who came and did his float, and then I got an email from him saying, "Can I take the breakfast, please?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." Went to meet him. He just wanted to know. He was like, "What's going on there? Or what is it?" Because he'd just been floated and it just blown his mind, and he just started to feel like, "What am I doing?" And we had another lady who so there's just all sorts of applications. We had another lady who was horse riding. She broke her neck, and she was quite a resilient lady, and she just stood straight up, and everyone was like, "Don't move." So there we are. She was like, "I'm absolutely fine." And then they got her in the ambulance, and they found that she'd broken her neck and she'd snapped the main artery here as well. The only reason she lived is because she got up. So the traditional advice is stay exactly where you are, but she was like, "Get off me, I'm getting up." And she got up, and her neck had gone and clamped the artery, so she didn't bleed to death. So she was fucking lucky. Anyway, that's not relevant to floating, but she floats all the time, and she's used it to get over a lot of the pain she has, and obviously, you know, that is a pretty traumatic event, so there's a lot going on in her head after something like that. She nearly died, and she uses floating. She's used floating to bring her back down to kind of a normal level of consciousness, where she's not basically, you know, having flashbacks to snapping her neck and breaking the main vein in her body. And so this is what it means to us at Floatworks. So it's all about growth and self-development and evolution of consciousness, because all these things that we're talking about, that's what they will contribute to. So we've talked about like what it's doing to the brain, and we've talked about all the things that it's doing to the body. And this like thing of being, like we thought about what to call this, because we don't want to be spiritual woo-woo, like call it spirit or soul or something, because then loads of people are just like, what are we talking about? But you know, these impacts are quantifiable, but there's definitely something that isn't quantifiable that you can't really explain. Like you floated, you know, you floated, you know what it's like. There's something you can't explain. Like when you're in there, there's like a disappearing of kind of where you are and what's going on, and there's a quietening of the mind that you just can't put into words or you can't quantify, and that's what we've decided to call just being. And I feel like that's where the magic of floating is, and that's where people have these, you know, come out of the tank and go and quit their job or whatever. And so why is it important? This is our new branding, by the way. Do you like it? Like a little still naked dude. It's some sort of trip. So it's important. The reason we think it's important is because So number one is just cool that there's something that you can use to reduce stress and anxiety without taking any drugs. It's just really cool. And number two, we feel that the way things are going, you know, the always-on nature of technology, that we're kind of becoming more and more and more disconnected from ourselves, and it's just getting easier and easier and easier just to distract yourself away from everything. And then number three is the importance of introspection. I don't think can be overstated. Like too many people just never really. I was one of them. Like I told you at the beginning, I was a bit of a moron really when I was younger. You don't really take a look at yourself. It's easy not to take a look at yourself, but when you're floating all the time or doing many other things, right? Psychedelics is a good example. Floating is a good example. Meditating is a good example. Doing something you love is a good example. But all these things, there's definitely a movement. There's all this bad stuff. Like we could lock Donald Trump in one of these tanks and just throw the key away and leave him there forever and let him introspect for the rest of the time. But you know, there's all that bad shit going on that we all know is there and we don't like. But there's also good stuff going on. There's lots of good movements. Like we meet them a lot. I'm sure you do, being a part of this. We meet them a lot at Floatworks. People that are trying to change the way they operate and trying to be better people and trying to do cool things. So floating is definitely a part of that. It's breaking rules and it's also trying to be better and do things in a better way and be better people. So that's why it's really important. So yeah, thank you, that's it. It was quick, short and sweet, but that's the story of floating, and now let's just have a chat.